All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming to our workshop here today regarding water. So I'm going to call this workshop to order. Let me remind you, it's not like a city council meeting. It's not formal. We can just have conversation, dialogue. Don't worry about any of the Robert's Rules of Order. So let's call it to order. Go. All right, city manager, would you start us out, please?
Yes. So Mr. Stevens had asked about doing a series of workshops. We are now on the water version of it. I do want to lead the conversation with the priorities keep switching in regards to what water priorities we have. Currently, our biggest priority is lead and copper. It is a federal and state mandate that we have accomplished by October of 24, which means we are on boots on the ground in the field trying to determine all of our water inventory. So it kind of has pushed back some of the other projects. We are at the point where it's like, let's get that done so we can take care of these big ones. When we met about a year ago, we had a discussion with water and new infrastructure coming in, particularly the Skyway Gardens Unit 2 complex. And there was a bit of concern that I vocalized in regards to the water pressure on that part of town. And so we did reach out to our engineers and ask them, hey, can you help us? Can we support the project? If we can't support the project, what are our options? Or if we can, it's a done deal and we're good to move forward. That was one water thing that we had talked about, which we did move forward with. The second water topic that we brought up is the past 2 summers, we've had a demand production issue regarding the west side of Alpine, which is the Sunny Glen well field that provide those water services to most of the west side of town. We weren't quite sure what was going on. We're not afraid of the water not being in the ground. We know we have equipment issues when pumps break or when lightning strikes and we're stuck in, la la land until a part can come in. We have very limited resources in moving out the equipment, fixing it, repairing it. When you get 2 down at one time, that does a dramatic hit on the city's water on that part of town. So that was the second item we really wanted to look into. We've also had issues for several years with one of our storage tanks, not being able to meet the capacity. It fills up, but it doesn't retain the water. We know it's going back into the system, but we just wanted to know, hey, do we need this storage tank? Is there another method we could do? We've also talked about adding additional wells. The city over the past 40 years has removed multiple wells. So we've actually reached out to TCEQ and started that process. It all boils down, everything that we've talked about with water boils down to an engineer helping us. The reason why it boils down to that is one, they have the knowledge and the education to help us understand our elevations and storage and flows and production. So Jacob and Martin was hired in, I believe, 2020 timeframe, and they've been helping us ever since. So we have assigned them with multiple task orders to provide the information, get us an idea and a path to go through. As we've had turnover and as we've had priorities switch, their priorities have also switched in helping us get data to move forward. So Kurt Harley's actually here this evening on Zoom, and he's put together a presentation, and I felt that it was really important for him to kind of go through the key things. Skyway Gardens feasibility study. We also have our generator grant for our water pumps and well fields that we're working on, that they've now stepped in to assist us because the data is a little bit more than we currently can manage. And what we call just water projects, specifically looking in the Sunny Glen area with the wells themselves. And so it's a phased project, and they've been very graciously patient with us in trying to get all the data we can find to them. But understanding the wells in Sunny Glen to the storage tanks to the actual residents and what's going on, what issues may we or may not have. Is there a pipe broken that we just can't find? Is there a well issue? We don't really know, and we didn't want to just guess. No point in throwing money into a well if it's not gonna help us. And one of the other items we've talked to them about that's been brought before council is the redundancy. Our city's divided basically two sides. You have one well field that services one, and you have another well field that services another. And at any given point, when one is struggling over the other, that they can't help each other. There's no going back and forth. So those are some of the items he's gonna talk. He's a wealth of knowledge and information. He's been really helpful with us in trying to get, okay, these are some options. This is the direction you can go. I know that they're currently waiting on some data from us to move forward with the Sunny Glen area. And Mr. Daugherty is also online in regards to one of the wells, because that's been a conversation as well. But I'm gonna let Kurt take over.
All right, I just want to make sure y'all can hear me okay in the room.
Yes.
Yes, loud and clear.
Awesome. Okay. Megan, I guess y'all have got that presentation pulled up. Will y'all be controlling the slides, or do you want me to take over? I can bring it up on my screen. What's going to be easiest there?
So we have it up, and Gio will control the slides.
Okay. All right. Can you can't see my cursor or my mouse then on the screen probably. I guess that'll work. Okay. Well, I'll get started. I don't want to burst anybody's bubble here, but I'm not going to have a whole lot of answers for you tonight. And a lot of what I'm going to have is going to probably regurgitate a lot of what Megan has already told you, but the reason being is because we're actively working on a lot of these tasks. So we're still trying to come up with answers. So I don't have a whole lot of real good answers tonight, but I do want to give you a little bit of information on what we've been working on and hopefully where we're headed once we have time to get that information from the city that Megan has mentioned. So these are the topics I'm going to talk about tonight, and that the ones that the city has tasked us with so far. One being the Skyway Gardens feasibility study, which Megan has mentioned. One item that I don't think Megan touched on just yet is the generators for the water system. So we're going to talk about that and the FEMA grant application that's ongoing. And then, of course, she talked about some of these additional water system concerns, those being Pierce Tank, the Sunny Glen well field capacity, and then the water system redundancy. And I'll talk a little bit about each one of those. All right, next slide. And I do want to reiterate what Megan said about, I mean, this is an open workshop, so anybody feel free to just say, whoa, stop. Let's park it there and spend a little time, or, hey, explain that more, what you're talking about. Feel free to just butt in and stop me at any time. This is obviously an informal discussion. But I want to start with the Skyway Gardens, and this is a feasibility study that we did finish up on, and we do have some recommendations here. A little bit of background. The city came to us and said, hey, we've got this development on the southeast part of town, and that's what the aerial I'm showing up there on to the right. I think most of y'all probably know where this is. It's on the far southeastern side of town, kind of at the tail end of the system. And there was concerns about this development being added on because there's concerns about pressures in that part of the system being inadequate. So we took this project on, did a feasibility study. We actually built a whole hydraulic system for the water system to do this feasibility. And some of the findings that we came out of that feasibility study are that, yes, this it's really not feasible to serve this location, and it's really due to the elevation of the site in relation to the lower hill tank, which is the tank on the hill that serves this area. This elevation of this development is it's really too high to have adequate pressures all the time. So that was kind of the result of that study, but it actually revealed something a little bit bigger. And go to the next slide. So this is a piece of a schematic of the water system, and you can see here on the bottom right is the Skyway Gardens is shown, kind of a red dot down there, and all the lines, the different colored lines are just different sized water lines in your water system. But what we found out is this whole area in pink in the bottom or the far southeast part of your water system, it's all really relatively high in elevation compared to the tank that it's being served by. So one of the recommendations that came out of this feasibility study is that the city should consider looking at modifying your pressure planes because the upper hill tank is actually at a much higher elevation. And actually the east part of the system where Sol Ross is served off of that east booster pump station, it's also at a higher elevation. So it could be that maybe this whole part of the system just needs to be moved to a different pressure plane, which will provide better service to this whole area, not just Skyway Gardens, but the whole area. Unfortunately, that's gonna require some installation of valves and maybe some new pipelines to make that change. But I think long term, it's something the city should consider looking at. And we talked about some different alternatives about how to do that because there are options. And it would require some more in-depth design level type engineering to figure out what needs to be done. But in a nutshell, I think the city should strongly consider looking at long-term planning of moving this part of their system into a different pressure plane to improve service. So that's.
And what would that cost?
That cost would have to be done would have to be developed, but in a more of a in-depth design level, because part of the problem is we don't know where all the valves are in the system, and there would have to be a lot of field investigation to figure out where those valves are. It may be that the valves are there to isolate this part of the system, but if they're not, there's quite a bit of line work that might have to be done. So it's not a tens of thousands of dollar improvement. It's probably hundreds of thousands of dollars magnitude. I don't know that it's $1 million project, but it's certainly hundreds of thousands of dollars. Sorry, I don't have
If we had $1 million in our mind, we could do it.
I think so. Yeah, I think it's about $1 million project. Yeah, million or less.
So Kirk, this is Rick. I live in that pressure plane area and I have a booster pump because I get 35 PSI to my meter, but I'm up the side of Hancock Hill, so I understand that issue. Increasing, probably the best is, in fact, as you're talking about changing pressure plane, because if you just increase volume, that might help, but it's not gonna help enough, and that's a higher cost solution, isn't it?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Yeah, and we talked around, putting in a new elevated tank and a new booster pump station to serve this area, but that's big dollars. That's millions, multi-millions of dollars. Just modifying the pressure plane and taking advantage of the elevated storage that you already have in the system. Well, that's less. That's less expensive, and that's what we recommend you consider doing. Any other questions on this particular item?
I know the one direction we were really looking at is tying to the Sol Ross tanks. Because as of right now, Sol Ross feeds primarily just Sol Ross.
Yep.
And so those are two tanks that we can ideally tie into this neighborhood and not have those issues moving forward.
What's the capacity of those tanks you would qualify then?
Well, good thing we have experts here. Marcus is here. Andrew, do you know how many gallons are in those tanks?
Yeah. Okay, so there's a lot of capacity.
If when you look at a SCADA map or the lines with them, theirs does this. It doesn't do this.
Yep.
It literally just kind of, and you can tell when they water, they got a lot of students. It's pretty consistent.
So those two.
They use water.
Yep.
So we could just hook into them to put it over there.
Well, yes. So
Okay,
in a perfect world, like they said, but there's the
just
valve, it's the
asking.
pipe, it's trying to figure out. But it is our system that we could just tie into this part of the Alpine.
It sounds like a really simple solution, right? But there is some
Of course.
piping. work
know all
probably.
that stuff. I just want.
We're just gonna get shovels and start digging.
Volunteers.
So those two at Sul Ross are only used by Sul
They're
Ross
primarily used for soul wells
primarily, but the city does pull out of that too.
on occasion. It's kind of a trickle down effect.
Does any of that feed Alpine Heights? Your call.
It does Alpine Heights, doesn't it? No?
I didn't think it did. That's why I asked. Just
There's two isolation valve on Avenue B and.
Yep.
Bird,
Yep, okay. Thanks.
now it works, so.
Yeah,
We're done, we'll fix it.
yeah, it's Johnny and I'm not out now.
I was gonna say.
Yeah, we've been there.
So primarily it is, but like they mentioned, there's all these isolation valves and I don't know how they tie into which part of the system. But I know that we can isolate things, especially when we have water leaks, based on all these valves. But we are learning, we don't know where all the valves are. And we're also learning that we don't have valves, which means we have to do what's considered a hot tap, which means we have to bring in a third party, and that's between 10 and 15 grand a pop. To have them come in to put in a valve for us.
So the action,
Johnny.
Johnny has a.
so the action from this, I think, Megan, is probably go investigate what it looks like to change planes. And we'll wait to hear what you come back with. That makes sense?
It's gonna have to be done.
Yeah.
Not, even if, we talked about this with the Skyway Gardens. Even if we don't put them in, you have people over there right now, look at Rick. Rick doesn't have good water pressure. These people don't, they're not up here complaining, but I've talked to a bunch of them and I know y'all have, they don't have.
Hmm.
Somebody told me they can be taking a shower and it trickles all of a sudden. I was like, cause I don't have that problem.
Do you
So-
have problems currently at the first Skyway Gardens? Has anyone said anything?
Not really. I
I
mean,
experience low pressure and I'm in Ward 4.
Do you have water, Martine?
No problems with water.
Okay. But
Pressure.
everybody doesn't. By Jackson Field, I know they don't. So that's what they're telling me. So let's fix it.
Wouldn't it matter if the pipes are calcified or something like that? We had that problem in our house, no cold water to the washer, pipe was totally clogged. Minerals.
Johnny will find that out when they start digging them all up.
Well,
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
so on that, Karen, the city delivers 35 PSI to the meter.
Okay.
What happens from the meter to the house is up to the homeowner.
Yeah.
And that's where the calcification occurs.
Understand that.
Yeah, so the homeowner's gotta work that as well.
And we all don't use the same type of pipes.
Yeah, we don't use that.
Yeah.
Okay, Kurt, I think, are we ready to let him move on?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, the next topic is the water system generators and just the background. I think most people know that as a result of I'm calling it the Great Freeze back in 21, I think, the legislature passed Senate Bill 3, which everybody infamously knows as SB 3, basically requiring all water systems to prepare what they called an emergency preparedness plan, or EPP. So what we did for the city is, prior to preparing that EPP, we performed a feasibility study for the city just to kind of help develop a plan, a long-term plan to provide emergency power, not just to water. It looked at water and wastewater facilities during an emergency outage like we saw during the Great Freeze. So the city utilized the information that we put in that feasibility study, and we helped them submit their EPP to the state. But the city also used that information that we prepared in that feasibility study to try to go after some grant money, because there's a lot of grant money out there right now, especially through FEMA and other sources, for generators, just because of what happened during the freeze. So the city submitted a grant application to FEMA, utilizing one of the options that we outlined in that feasibility study. And that application is ongoing, and we're actively right now assisting the city with that FEMA grant application. I'm optimistic that the city will get funded. I hope you do. I think it will be great for the city. But if you go to the next slide, just so you know what is in that application, First of all, the grant is a 90-10 funding program, which is great. It's 90% grant and 10% local
awesome.
match. You don't get those very often. So if y'all can get funded through this program, it'd be great. So what's in the application right now is fixed generators. In other words, a permanent generator that'll stay at the site at 4 sites: at the Muskie Pump Station, at the Sunny Glen Pump Station, at the East Pump Station, and at the City Yard, which is up near the upper and lower hill tanks. So those 4 sites would have fixed generators. And then the grant also allows for installation of what we call manual transfer switches at each of the well sites in the Sunny Glen and the Muskie well fields. I don't know if it hits every well, but it's the bigger wells for sure. And so what that does, because you have a manual transfer switch, the city has a mobile generator that they could move to each of the wells and keep some of the wells in service during an outage. The reason we didn't do a fixed generator at each well, it's just too expensive. It was a lot of expense to do that. So basically what this would provide for, if you get the grant and you're able to install all these generators and these transfer switches, it will basically it should allow you to make it through any prolonged power outage, and not lose water, because we're hitting all the primary booster pump stations and the ability to use wells selectively to get water into the system. So it's a great opportunity, and I hope the city gets funded and we get to help y'all get those generators installed.
When would
Any
we
questions?
know?
Any questions?
When would we know if we received the grant? Anybody have an estimate?
Actually, this grant's been over a year now. We regularly ask for updates. We're not out of the running, but we're also not being told yes or no. So we waited a year for them to come back and say if they needed more information. They came back in late November with, oh yeah, we still have your application, but. Well, the but is where we were all like, oh no. Because a lot of it was information would take us a lot longer to figure out, which is where Jacob and Martin came in to help us. The grant wasn't 90-10 original. It was actually an 80-20. And so they changed that, which required us to update, of course, our expenses. But it's been a year since we applied, so we had to update that as well. We based it off of the most reasonable part of the feasibility study where we could afford. The city's already has our matching. The matching was put aside by council a couple years ago, so we're not worried about that. We honestly don't know. It's us and actually Jeff Davis County that are the last 2 in the running. So both of us are kind of fingers crossed one of us gets it.
This is
Or
Texas
both.
FEMA or federal FEMA?
This is federal.
And I didn't put it on here, but it's going to be about an $850,000 project, Megan. That's what it's going to be probably after we update the cost estimates. So it's about call it an $850,000 project. So 10% of that would be y'all's match.
And the reason, just on the technical side, just maybe more than you want to dive into. The reason you're putting manual transfer switches, recommending that is you want to make sure you got wells pumping, so you're not pumping anything dry. Is that the strategy?
As far as having the manual transfer switches.
Yeah, I put generators in all the time. I got one in my house. It's automatic,
Okay.
power goes off, fires up in 30
Yes.
seconds, I'm running.
Yeah, and the reason it's manual and not automatic, because it was not cost feasible to put a generator at each well.
Gotcha, okay, that's the well issue. And what do these generators run on?
Diesel.
Okay, and what size are they?
What size are the generators?
Yeah, ballpark. They're 60 kW?
Yeah, I think they're in range probably from 60 to 100 kW.
Okay, thank you.
I could pull that up. I have the exact numbers, but
Okay, you gave me a ballpark.
okay.
I have a question for you, Megan. Was this originally the money from ETP? That was the
Yes.
parks?
So the money was originally provided to the city from Energy Transfer Partners. And we decided as the council to move part of it for this specific. because of what happened in the freeze. And even if it's not a freeze and the power goes out, we were one of the luckiest cities in our area because we actually got the last generators from Pecos. Keep our wells running, so nobody went. Right out.
And that, oh, sorry, I'm just gonna ask real quick, the total for that ETP, if we're only talking 85,000 here cost.
We moved 156,000.
Okay.
So we didn't move all of it. It was just a small portion of it.
That's 71,000 that will come back, plus everything that's still left there. So that money could be earmarked towards something else.
Except for we don't know final totals yet. So we're earmarking the full amount, and so we know exactly what we're gonna spend, because we may not get awarded this for another year.
What's it take to run a well? KW? You know, offhand? What size generator? To run a well?
Usually a 60 or 80.
I'm sorry?
Usually a 60 or 80, you know,
Oh, to run a well that big? Oh, okay.
it all depends on the horsepower.
Yeah, okay. I'm just thinking about generators. So what I think I heard is we're gonna install generators at the wells. We already have those generators?
No, we're installing generators at the pump station. We're installing transfer switches at the wells to allow easily accessible connectivity to a generator. We have a mobile generator. So we can utilize it one place, get our tanks and all that going, and move it to another place if we need to.
That's the strategy. Okay.
You answered my question.
The usual horsepower on the 60 KW.
Well, that's drawing power. It's different than what you're pulling out of the making your horsepower motor.
So when we get closer to actually hopefully getting this grant, the engineers will come in and help us make sure we do get the right type of generators, the right type of equipment. So that we can run basically fully operational despite if we have electricity.
Good.
Any other questions?
So as part of your contract agreement, will you be providing a testing and maintenance procedure for these generators? I have a lot of experience with diesel generators, and there's maintenance and testing that goes as part of the deal, or a year later, you go out there and it won't start.
Is that question for me? I'm just making sure. Okay, so of course, we won't actually be installing them. I mean, we would just be designing them, but what we typically recommend is after they're installed is that the city have a contract with whoever the generator provider was to come out and do that annual maintenance or annual check. But that would be typically a contract between the city and the generator supplier, but we strongly recommend it, yes. And of course, you want to put that generator, and we'll design this, that it's programmed that it comes on either weekly or monthly. And that's usually a user set preference by the owner of how often they want it to run periodically. Because what you don't want is that thing sitting there for a year and not running. You want it running periodically to make sure it's still working. Correct.
So we do have a contract with our current distributor for the two main generators we have. They come out biannually to do all of the maintenance, but it's also scheduled every, I believe, Wednesday. It goes off and tests itself to make sure that there's no issues with it. So we would carry the same type of contract with all of these as well.
And these generators you have now are also diesel,
Yes,
because diesel doesn't store well.
no,
So that might have to put additives in it, you have to test it periodically.
that's why we test it every week to have that. Oh, no.
Good enough, thank you.
Okay, are you ready to move on, Kurt?
I'm ready when you are. I'm in no hurry, so y'all's pace.
We are. Let's go ahead and go.
Okay. All right, next slide. I've got a glaring misspelling word there I've been staring at for the last 5 minutes. Okay, so these are some go back to the previous slide, sorry. Yeah, okay. So these are some additional water system concerns and issues that we've been talking with the city about. And this is really the part where I'm not gonna have a whole lot of answers for you. So this is a lot of areas that we're starting to look at. But the three primary ones that were brought to our attention is the Pierce tank. And we'll look at where that's at. The possible lack of sufficient well capacity in the Sunny Glen well field, and then the lack of redundancy issue that Megan mentioned. So next slide. So I just threw this map in here. We'll come back to it in a minute, but I didn't know how familiar y'all are with your water system. But it's going to help in this discussion to kind of have an overall idea. And this is where I wish I had a pointer. Of course, the far west is where the Sunny Glen pump station is out there, and the Sunny Glen well field is in the northwest of town. And then more in the central part of town, to the center of the map, is the Muskie pump station, and the Muskie well field is north of town. Then you've got your upper and lower hill pump station down there at the bottom on the hill, and then the east booster pump station to the far right of the map. I put that big bold red line down the middle of your system for a reason, and we'll come back to that in a minute. I'm going to come back to this map. So go to the next slide. Okay. So the Pierce tank, and this is a snapshot of that system over there on the right of the far western part of the system. The Pierce tank is in the far northwest part of the system, and it's supposed to serve as elevated storage for all the customers that are kind of west of Sunny Glen pump station. However, the issue with that tank right now, and this one is super perplexing to me, and we'll figure it out eventually, but we don't have an idea just yet what's going on. But for some reason, and this has been happening for a while, the city is unable to keep that tank full or even to fill it. And it's, like I said, this one's really bugs me, because no kidding, I spent a whole day out there one time, and I don't know if anybody's in the room that was with me that day, but we closed valves, we opened valves, we turned pumps on for a full day trying to get that tank to fill. And literally it's right there close to the Sunny Glen pump station, and the water should go from point A to point B, and it just doesn't. And we are tasked right now. We have a task order with the city to investigate this, and I know we're waiting on some information from the city, but this one's got me perplexed, and we've got to figure it out, because it is a storage tank that needs, it's an integral part of the system, and it needs to fill and drain like it's supposed to. And I just don't know why it's not. And it's a bit frustrating to me that I can't figure out why, but we'll figure it out.
What's the time frame to go figure it out?
Well, like I said, right now the city is gathering. I hate to put this off on your staff, Megan, but we are waiting. We are waiting on some information back from the city. They're checking on some things and going to get us some information. But after we get that back from them, well, I suspect we'll probably have to come back out there and look at it in the field again. But I don't know. In the next few months, I'm hoping we can figure this one out.
So what sort of information?
It's all of the data, water logs, well logs, anything and everything that we've been able to try to put together and send there.
But we know it leaks. So what's the data gonna help do?
Well, so the process is we're starting more with the wells to
Yeah.
see. We don't know if it's the tank itself. We don't know if it's the piping itself. We don't know if it's what, we're trying to start from the ground up. We're
Okay,
gonna
so
start
you're
with the
doing what
ground.
I asked you to go do, which is wonderful. Okay. What's
we're-
coming up? What's
and
going in?
How's it
How's it
going? I don't know. I know Kirk probably isn't aware of this, but at one point, I know I spoke with Mr. Marquez about it, was what if we just cut it off? Like, we don't use Pierce at all. We haven't been able to use it.
Yeah.
Is it needed? But when we hit the summer and we have those issues, Pierce is important
Yeah.
because it's a second, or third storage tank where the water goes from one to another into the system. And instead of trying to get two to fill the whole time, we have that third one in place. But yes, it's starting from the ground up. It's It's
Okay.
exactly the process that we kind of talked about with, you know, comes out of the ground, where does it go first? Are there any issues between the ground and that storage? Are there any issues between the next one? Are there any issues with the pumps?
So part of the reason for asking is if it's gonna take a couple months to go figure it out, looking to summertime, we know we're gonna need it. I'm a planner working backwards from when do we need it? When do we have to get an answer so we can start working on it?
I'm also taking into consideration, when lightning hits our pumps
Yeah,
and they're out.
Yeah.
That's also a huge problem,
Yep.
because then the water's just not coming out of the ground, period. There is a delay in getting pumps. I
Yeah.
know we have Skinner, who does a wonderful job and bails us out every
Every
time,
time.
even at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Uh-huh.
This past summer, he bailed us out, even though I wasn't in Alpine. He was on the phone with, we're gonna try it, we're gonna try it. But being more prepared with, if we need to buy two $20,000 pumps now
Yep.
to be prepared for the summer month, then we do that.
Okay.
The procurement is usually what gets us. I've come before you in the past, but this is an emergency. People need water.
Sure.
We're trying to be more proactive with it.
So why not go buy the pumps now? I mean.
I'm getting the RFP ready so that we can get them.
Good, okay, so.
They've already started working on all the quotes for everything else going on in their
Right.
department besides, you know, the future projects.
I
There's
got
no
pumps
lighting
for all
protection
that.
you can put on these.
Oh, we've tried all kinds of things,
Okay.
unless you have an atmospheric bubble. We have lightning rods out there. It's,
Go buy the pumps.
although Johnny's doing hand signals. It fries them. There's-
Worked in the oven.
Anyone else have any questions with, I know we're kind of,
Ano-
Yeah,
Another reason this tank is important and and I know the system's been able to function and get by without the tank really being full, but from a regulatory standpoint, TCEQ recognizes this tank as elevated storage for that part of the system. So the tank is necessary. I mean, from a compliance standpoint, technically you would not have elevated storage available in that part of the system without that tank online, even though it's been able, the system's been able to operate without it. And you may be asking, well, how is the system operating without it? Well, there's two orange circles there on that map. Those are valves that basically hold back pressure. So I believe those two pressure sustaining valves are what are allowing the system to operate the way it is. But it's kind of a Band-Aid. It's allowing you to get by. Long term, I would say you need that tank back online.
and
And we're
Kurt,
gonna,
if I'm wrong, but wouldn't it also make our SCADA system more automated?
yes.
Is TCEQ aware of all this?
They are now.
I started to say, they
Um,
they are now.
Well, when we started investigating the whole concept of Sunny Glen, I had to reach out to TCQ. Because I can't just take a well back online, which is where this kind of all went down the rabbit hole. So I've actually contacted TCQ. They've kind of given me some guidance, and the very first thing is you have to have an engineer. Because they have to file an engineer report to really do anything. But they also were able to kind of tell us, you know, you submitted a water plan that has all of your wells, your storage, and we need to make sure we have all that correct.
And that's on our plan. This one's on our plan.
Yes, Pure Tank was on our plan.
So can we, I know I'm getting a little bit ahead, can we look at this in a February meeting? Get an update?
Oh, definitely.
That'd be helpful. Okay?
Maybe we'll get a bus and go out and look at it.
Can you get the bus?
I can do that.
yeah, you're our connection.
Climb up the Pierce Tank, it's a good.
Bring your
climb.
hiking boots,
These are
right?
great hiking boots, yeah. And watch out for the mud along the way.
I can do that.
Okay, we're running
Okay.
low on time.
Okay. So Sunny Glen wellfield capacity. I mean, this is something that the city has talked to us about as far as being a potential concern. I mean, we're not certain until we get the data that Megan has mentioned about actual well pumping capacities. We have book numbers on what they're supposed to generate, but we're looking for actual numbers. to see if the wells actually have the capacity they're supposed to have. But even if they do, if you look at that table there below at the very bottom, I tried to break down where your different wells are. You have the Sunny Glen well field, and you have a couple of wells at the city yard. You have a well at the East Pump Station, and you have the Muskie well field. Well, you can see that Muskie well field, it's almost 60% of your total capacity of your wells. So the concern might be that, okay, if we lose the Muskie well field for some reason, I don't know, maybe you have a consecutive breaks in the line coming to town where you have a prolonged time where you need the Sunny Glen well field to supply, a good portion of the city. Well, you might have issues there. So there might be a need, maybe after we do the study, to expand the well field. Maybe at a minimum, at least make sure the wells you have are generating the flow that they're supposed to. And sometimes that means just rehabbing a well, cleaning it out. So this topic has a lot of exploration left for us to do, but it's one of the things we're going to be taking a look at for the city.
Not very
All right.
long. So we just signed the task order this fiscal year. Like I said, priorities have been shifted slightly with the lead and copper, getting the boots on the ground to get that one because it does have the federal mandate.
And seems to me, again, I'm all can be forgetful, but we were talking about leasing another well. Is that other well part of those that were just up there?
So this would help us move in that direction and understand what we have. Do we need to add? Do we need to subtract? And where can we go? We have talked about adding the well because we've had the issues 2 summers in a row with the demand in production and equipment. But instead of just jumping the gun and taking on a new well and spending all that money to be TCQ compliant, I really wanted to get an overview of the whole project and what it would entail. And Mr. Daugherty is still on board with the city leasing that well if we.
And Megan, where's daughter well on this map?
Leased by the gallon.
That's undetermined. That would be part of a negotiation.
Well, I know it isn't, but it's gonna be close.
So the well is in the Sunny Glen field. It's not on the map because it's not a city well.
I know that, but if it was, where would it be? Can you tell me a guess, kind of close?
We're pumping
Here, I'll move my pen.
25 gallons a minute into an irrigation system with a 25 horsepower pump. It is pumped as much as 500 gallons per minute back in the 1950s. For 3 years in the mid-50s, that well averaged 200 gallons per minute, 3 straight years.
Would we need that well if we were able to transfer water from the other side?
We don't know until we really get a full understanding of our system.
Back to Judy's question, where is that well?
It's
Upper left of your page there.
Upper left.
So it's in the box up here. It's gonna be right around here.
Okay.
So in just doing the math on the 4 wells that are there, or the well field, the city yard, the pump station, the Ruskies, that's 3.7 million gallons of water a day. So.
And this is where that next step comes into place with the redundancy, is if the sides works together, one could help the other if we had issues.
So that's the capacity. And we use about 2 million gallons a day max.
And we wouldn't have the concern during the summer if we could tie them together. So when the tanks drop, it's not a matter of how much we can produce. It's not a matter, it's literally, we just can't get it. The equipment will fail, or we just can't get it out of the ground fast enough. And so if those storage tanks drop below a foot. And so it's really understanding, once we pull it from the ground, how does it get to the storage tanks? How does it get to the system itself? And then tying the 2 together. And we may need 3, 4, 5 more wells if we're thinking long-term bigger plans. But right now, we're really looking at, okay, this is how your system truly works.
Yep.
And this is how you're gonna move forward for growth and for redundancy. I don't think anyone in this room knew that when you turn the water on, there's a lot more to it than just turning it
Oh,
on.
I think some of them know. Yeah, some do. Yeah, so we have about 5 more minutes before we'll need to break to get ready for the city council meeting.
Would you like him? to finish?
I can cover this last one real
Whatever's
quick.
most important in the next 5 minutes, please.
Yeah, I can cover the redundancy issue real quick. We already talked about the Sunny Glen well field and that not having enough capacity to cover the whole system if Muski's down. But the other one is a bigger issue. Go to the last slide. So I told you there's this big bold red line through here. So if you look, everything to the right of that line is on a lower, what we'll call a lower pressure plane, lower elevation. Everything to the left is at a higher elevation, we'll call an upper pressure plane. Right now, the city doesn't have any way to move water from the lower to the upper pressure plane. So if the Sunny Glen well field or the Sunny Glen pump station was down or something happens catastrophic to it, the city currently doesn't have a way to move water from the lower to the upper pressure plane. So that's something that we would recommend the city investigate and figure out a project or something, capital improvement to be able to move water from a lower pressure plane to an upper. And it could be just a new pump station or something like that, but we would investigate that and do a feasibility study on it. So that was the last item I want to point out.
Now, I know we have Kirk Grant on the line as well. He's the one with Communities Unlimited, who they graciously helped us with the rate study in regards to our water. We originally spoke with them in regards to our wastewater plant and our sewer rates, especially at looking at borrowing long-term to be able to go out for that debt for our sewer plant. They also did look at our water as well and provided options to make rate changes for capital improvements and long-term debt as well. Based off of what they've provided, I don't think we have enough time, Kurt, but would you be willing to come back and kind of go over it with them?
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, that sounds great. I'll absolutely do that. I was just about to tell you guys that my daughter has a Christmas pageant tonight, so. But yeah, that's totally fine. I know you guys have another one coming up this month, right? Later in the month, is that right?
January.
We don't
Okay,
need to get into January. I'll get you the schedule and we'll get you on there to kind of go over the discussion with rates.
That sounds great. Appreciate it. Thank you so much, Megan.
Okay, any other discussion or questions? Okay, anybody have any questions? Discussion, thoughts, ideas?
It's not over. We're moving forward. We're researching, we're getting everything together so that we can make sure we address all of our water for the city.
Which is important, yeah. Okay. Well, we thank you guys for being here. We're gonna take, the city council meeting officially starts at 5:30, so we're gonna adjourn the workshop. All right. Okay.
Thank you all.